Welcome to this World Satsanga in November 2024. And in October, we had a lecture on, which was basically the first part of two lectures on the road to collectivism, which was the checksum effect and how it affects the potential to elect a political or a group leader. So the second part is collectivism. And collectivism is something that we consider as being part of a collective as the loss of individuality. And in the higher sense, in terms of how we interact with our true energetic self, when we've finished our evolutionary cycle or when we've decided that we no longer need to interact with any function of or any part of the multiversal environment to affect our evolution and therefore the evolution of our true energetic self, which is the larger volume of sentience that we as souls, or smaller aspects of that volume of sentience, are projected from, would enter into. But collectivism in terms of being here on Earth means a thought process, basically, a desire to work in a way which is going to be of benefit to everybody and not the individual. So whereas collectivism in the energetic sense is the recombining of sentience with the higher volume of sentience, a bit like the drop of water entering the sea, and the drop of water becomes the sea because the sea is the water and the water is the drop. So the whole thing becomes the same thing. This is a slightly different thing. It's more of a concept of how we think, behave, and act. So collectivism is where we start to no longer accept individuals who are incorrect in our leadership, and therefore we start to self-govern. So when we start to self-govern, we start to initially create the condition where we choose the better route. We rather than choosing to throw the sweet wrapper or the McDonald's wrapper out of the car window, we choose to stop the car, find a bin and put it in the bin. We choose to help the old lady across the road or the old man across the road. We choose to assist the individual who's the beggar to find not just money for drugs if they're struggling with drugs, but find location where they can effectively be helped to come off the drugs and start to become a functional individual within a civilized race of individuals. So they start to become useful and start to have a reason to be. So what better way to help somebody other than giving them money, but to help them find salvation by putting them in contact with or making sure that they are in contact with and taken on board by a group of individuals who can help them move beyond their addiction, start to give them a reason to be, to start to give them a state of purpose in their existence by getting them cleaned up, getting them into understanding what their skill set is, working with that skill set, and that skill set being made available for employment. And so we start to see that collectivism is not just about thinking of the self, but it's about thinking of how we can help others. And this doesn't mean we make ourselves available to others and these others start to depend on us. It's us helping them become self-aware of their own needs and how they can work with themselves and become able to look after themselves as well. The old adage of, you can give a man a fish or a lady a fish and they'll feed themselves for a day, but if you teach them to fish, they'll feed themselves for the rest of their life, is basically what it's all about. But it's more than that. It's teaching them to fish, and then they can help others to fish, and they can help others to fish, and they can help others to fish. So there's a fractalized downstream function of that. And this desire to be of service and help others and teach others in a way which isn't demonstrative, but on an exemplary basis, is the way in which collectivism works. So let me just describe it again in a slightly different way. Collectivism is when we start to think, behave and act in a way which isn't individualized. Although we are individuals still and we have our individual thought processes, everything we do, we should consider how that affects others around us. How does it affect the environment? How does it affect the the insects in the grass or the earth in our garden? How does it affect the animals, the other animals? How does it affect the individuals in our workspace or our location where we're living? How does it affect those individuals who have no interaction with us at all? Is there a downstream function through affecting one person that's close to us that may affect others downstream? And so we start to think in terms of self-governance and not needing to be governed by other individuals. We would naturally be of service and provide our skill set for the benefit not only of others, but also of ourselves as well, but in terms of the general population in total. Now, this means that our abilities to create things and to manufacture things wouldn't depend upon the remuneration. It would depend upon the fact that we're all equal, irrespective of whether we're doctors, lawyers, surgeons, consultants, scientists, mechanical engineers, electronic engineers, software engineers, carpenters, fishermen, people sweeping the street. We all have the same level of importance in the big picture. And so the access to that which is created, such as food, if we were a farmer, and our function would be to farm and to make that work available to us, would be rewarded in being able to have spares for the tractor, for instance, or a place to live, such as a house, or medical services if we're ill. So everything we did would allow us to be able to get access to the collective ability to feed ourselves, clothe ourselves, educate ourselves, medicate ourselves, and progress scientifically as well, and spiritually. Because we're starting to think collectively rather than individually, we are able to fully understand how to think, behave, and act in a mature way. And as we start to do this individually, collectively we start to do it as well. So there would no longer a need for overall governance, for governments themselves, because we would be creating our own level of governance, which is in accordance with the needs of the collective as it is. So this is a case of understanding how we can help others benefit from our work and how we would benefit from their work. It's not bartering and trading. It's being part of an overall worldwide civilization where individuals in third worlds have the same level of education as those in the so-called first world, and they have the same ability to get to medicines, to be productive, and to provide an equal level of service to others, and therefore gain access to equal level of service. So we won't get people suffering from droughts or hunger or war, because there's no point in having war if everybody's equal and everybody's got access to everything. There's no need to have billions of dollars or pounds, because if you want to spend some time on a yacht, it'll be there for you. You could do it. Clearly, you don't own the yacht. The collective owns the yacht, but there are times when you could access it. There are times when you could access vehicles if you wanted to, because we produce vehicles at the number that is necessary to support the collective, and not too many, for example. The same for housing. We would have a number of houses that is required to support the collective, and not too many. Birth control would be a natural thing, so there's not too many people on the planet that it can't be supported by the natural farming methods that we're using that doesn't affect or damage the environment. So we start to think in terms of being a very, very mature civilization, self-governing as an individual in the correct way, and therefore self-governing as a collective in the correct way. And when we start to think in this way, where we're of service to each other, and they're of service to us, whilst we're also being of service to ourselves, then we become a spiritually high frequency or metaphysical civilization as well. We move up the frequencies and we start to gain access to the other functions associated with being a higher frequency. And when we do this, we start to understand who and what we are, and we move into the higher frequencies. And again, we start to get an even more increased level of communicative bandwidth. And so we move beyond the need to be in the low frequencies associated with the gross physical, where our communicative bandwidth is so low that we hardly know who we are, let alone understand that the human body is just a vehicle. We think the human body is what we are. So collectivism is the route forwards, without doubt. And all major civilizations that have moved beyond their planet, their planet of origin, have achieved this level of understanding with each other. At various different degrees, clearly, but they're definitely working in this level, because if they didn't work in this level, they wouldn't be able to work together in a way which is beneficial to all of them, and therefore allows all of them to benefit. It's the only way that we're going to leave the planet, is to be in a collective function, even though we've got individualized free will. So the individualized free will part of it is that we choose to and desire to enter into this collective state of beingness, of function, of governance, of service. Let's move on to the questions and answers. Welcome to this Q&A session of the World Satsanga on the 27th of November 2024. And first question is from Miriam. And the question is, if we are here to help God or Source with data we receive through our experiences so God can also learn and evolve, how is that possible that we keep repeating the same lessons over and over again during history? There are millions of people in the world for thousands of years that they are going through the same lessons like love, hate, forgiveness and so on. My question is, when is God finally going to learn these lessons so we can move on? Why do these lessons keep repeating through different souls? Well, actually, the end of this question actually answers the question. It's not a case of why do we continue to do it. It's the fact that every soul has to experience everything, every circumstance, every interaction with other individuals, that is individual souls or aspects within the environment that they're in, and the different circumstances that they collectively create. And so, although it appears to be that we're repeating the same things over again, there are times when those things are significantly different, or are different in a very minor way. But it's that minor way that makes it different. So, although we do the same thing, we do the same thing slightly differently. So, because it's done differently by different souls, those different souls are experiencing it firsthand, whereas others experienced it firsthand before them and have therefore moved on. So it's not something to do with, there are souls that have experienced this, so therefore Source has experienced it. The answer is yes. It's a case of the holistic experience and the need for the collective level of aspects or souls that become incarnate being in a position where they also recognise that a particular road that they're going down is not the optimal route to allow them to move on from an experiential perspective, and therefore remove any karmic link that they would have associated with that action. So the variations in the experience are what creates depth of experience and depth of evolution, and therefore higher quality of evolution. Whereas in reality, if we just experience something once, we're not getting the whole picture. We're not experiencing it in different ways. For instance, if we were to, and I've used this example a lot, so excuse me, if we were to travel from New York to Seattle, clearly we could travel there by plane. And we've experienced travelling from New York to Seattle. But that doesn't give you depth of experience, it just gives you the end result. The depth of experience is, how do we do it? We could choose to use the plane, or we could fly halfway across the states and drop in at, for instance, Oklahoma or Arkansas or Texas, Dallas, those sort of areas, and then do the rest of the journey on a motorbike or a push bike or a car or a train or a Greyhound bus or hitchhike. Or simply we could go from place to place and stay there for 2 or 3 months or even a year. And that creates a depth of understanding and a depth of experience. So the whole point is that Not that we're not learning the lessons, we are learning the lessons, but collectively we need to learn the lessons by experiencing them ourselves. So when we've all experienced everything in the way that we experience it, then Source has experienced it from a completely holistic perspective. And that's why we do it. We do it because, in effect, what we're doing is creating a holistic, a very in-depth and detailed, high-quality level of understanding and experience, which allows a better quality and a higher quality level of evolutionary perspective. And it also augments the quality and the density of the sentience associated with an aspect as well. Now, that's something we need to sort of consider as well. It's not just about evolution, it's about the sentience as well. Next question is from Ulla, and she says, this year Russia has hacked elections in Moldova, Georgia, Venezuela and the US to install puppet regimes in power. Wrong is on the throne and truth is on the scaffold. That's the scaffold for being beheaded or being hung, basically. Do we live in bizarro world, or will the truth set us free? We do live in bizarro world now, and at the end of the day, the whole point of this is to allow us to collectively recognise and understand that we can't progress if we don't look at what's happening around us. If we just live in a case of, well, it's not my problem, it's somebody else's problem, I'm just going to continue to do what I'm doing, then we shouldn't complain about what happens when it happens, because we've not voted for the right person or we've not interacted with the right individuals. What we need to do is to be able to recognise at some point, and this is why I went into the lecture about the checksum effect, by the way, and the going into collectivism, is that we can't allow, eventually we won't allow, the direction to go into a downward spiral, the direction that we exist within to go into a flat line. We need to be able to recognise what's happening in the world, how we individually and therefore collectively influence it, and create a condition where we work in a collective way rather than an individualised way. So things like installing puppet leaders, for example, or those individuals who are being, shall we say, placed in power because they're benefiting themselves, and those individuals who put them in power are also benefiting from those people being put in power because they can get things done, for example, that they wouldn't normally get things done. And you can see this happening in the States right now. There's individuals who've worked with certain leaders, and those leaders don't realise that they're being double worked. They think that they're putting people in power that are going to support their regime, but these individuals who are being put in power are using that power to be able to benefit themselves later. So you can see that there's a whole regime there of double thinking, basically, and double actioning as well. But it's something where we're going to collectively start to realise that we're not benefiting from it at all. We are allowing that which is inappropriate from a medium term and a long term perspective to not become visible or not become available for us to use. So we're starting to think in the shorter term all the time. Well, the short term thought process never actually works, because it gives you gratification in the now rather than in the rest of the now, so to speak. So we're going to, at some point, look at what's happening, realise it's not appropriate, and collectively work together to ensure that that direction that we could go in is not what we're actually going to go into, because we're not going to collectively let it happen. If you look at history, a lot of the great movers and shakers, things like Oliver Cromwell, things like Nelson, some of the other individuals in American history and Australian history and European history, they've all been able to look at what's going wrong and change it. Now, in some instances, and this is particularly true of Cromwell, what they created was actually basically what they'd replaced. So they didn't actually solve the problem, but they changed the emphasis of the problem, and therefore that was acceptable. But in essence, it doesn't actually help. There needs to be something which is in place that allows us as individuals to collectively work together through collectively recognizing and rejecting a so-called dead-end direction, and therefore allow us to move forwards in a way that is not dead-end but allows growth as well. And it allows us to work together collectively, harmoniously, and in synergy to create a better, let's call it, extension to the now. We can call it the future if we want to. So bizarreness is the ripple in the matrix, if you want to call it that. It's the thing that is making us wake up. It's the point in which we are starting to think, hang about, this can't be right. We're no longer going to accept what's in front of us, because actually it's not real. It's something that we don't collectively need to create or want to create, and therefore what's being created is lack of evolution. So it's all part of a higher function, and that higher function is realization, not just self-realization, but collective realization. And collective realization can only really happen when everything that's happening around us is so out of place that it's noticeable. Because if it's not noticeable, we don't notice it. But if it's so out of place that it is noticeable, then we start to collectively work on changing that to a more beneficial way of moving forwards. Well, I hope that's answered the question. Ula carries on and says that she'd like to know more about our light bodies, and she quotes Wendy Kennedy saying that our current 3D light body, or 3 frequencies, is shaped like a Merkaba, 2-star tetrahedrons with 3 base pyramids. One pyramid spins in one direction and one pyramid spins in the other direction at the same time. But we're moving into an octahedron, 2 4-based pyramids, which is the 5-dimensional, 5-frequential light body. It also spins in counterclockwise and then down in clockwise direction. She also said the meridian system is different in the 5D body, so the healers will find the old 3D spot on a meridian that may have shifted to a different location to be shift. And there's also some diagrams, and we'll put this in the chat as well, so you can see the chat and see how the questions relate to the images that are being described. So Ulla also asks, there's a diagram reflecting the truth about positives versus negative charges in the male versus female bodies, or not. So is this how I see, the question is basically, is this how I see our light bodies or meridians shifting as we ascend the frequencies? Please explain these new age concepts in their real terms as a psycho-spiritual healer. Well, interestingly enough, I start to get a bit worried about the use of physical descriptions for something which is not physical. Now, the interesting thing is there's a comment about counterclockwise direction and clockwise direction. And if you go right down to the 6th level of quanta, we start to get to where the Anu are. That's the first manifestation, or the lowest level of manifestation from a quanta-based metric. Quanta being, atomic, subatomic, etc., where we start to see the manifestation of the gross physical, and there's left and right hand Anu. Now this is, and the energies move in and out of the Anu itself to create the possibility of these two together, creating the basic fundamental building blocks of the subatomic levels. So there's a little bit of a correlation there with known information that is known by Besant and Ledbetter, and of course the Hindu yogis for hundreds of years, thousands of years even. So there's a level of common knowledge there. But in terms of the, can we be represented in sacred geometry? And the answer is No, not really, because we're not. our sentience and our energy associated with our sentience isn't anything to do with the gross physical. So to say that we are associated with and we can be represented as a macabre in a specific geometric form is not specifically correct at all. However, if you look at it from a different perspective, and you start to see that every frequency has a like a shape associated with it. And I'll give you an example. If you had a pan, a metal pan full of sand, we'll give it say for instance a very thin level of sand, and then you exposed it to a certain frequential state or a musical note, if you want to give it that, then the sand will adopt a certain shape, because there's a level of geometry or sacred geometry associated with a particular frequency. Now, this doesn't mean that we can be represented by a level of geometry, but what it can suggest is that there's a potential for a symbolic representation associated with the frequencies that are used by a particular body or group of bodies or collective body system that can be described geometrically. So, are our light bodies a geometric figure? No, they're not, because we don't have light bodies per se, because in effect what we have is a series of templates. If you want to call them light bodies, you can do, but that's quite limiting. In effect, the series of templates that create the gross physical and the spiritual physical basically being the lower astral, the upper lower astral, the lower upper astral, and the upper astral, are different levels of frequential status associated with the construct that ends up being the gross physical, and the associated frequencies that are supporting it and allowing it to be anchored here in this particular frequential state of the multiverse, in fact the lowest part of it being the physical universe. The other thing I have a problem with is this constant reference to 3D and 5D. Now, lots of New Age individuals say, we're going from the third dimension to the fifth dimension. Well, what's the fourth dimension? Why are we bypassing the fourth dimension? Well, the fourth dimension's time. And then in the next breath, they say, well, time doesn't exist. So how can we bypass something that doesn't exist? So we start to see that the reference to geometry as a function of what we are is starting to become displaced, and in the same framework as the misunderstanding about which particular level of structure we exist within. So my understanding is 3D is it's basically a misunderstanding of the use of three-dimensional metrics to explain volume. If you have volume, then that volume explains gross physical, it's and density. If we have 5 dimensions, again, what's that mean? Does it mean that we've got another 2 metrics somewhere, but we've bypassed one metric that we call the 4th dimension, which is actually time, which we know doesn't exist? So we start to see that, again, it's all a bit of a conundrum, a bit of misinformation that sometimes is based upon some right information, but there's a level of information that's there that we tend to gravitate towards because that's what we prefer to see or experience, rather than get the actual information that is probably outside of our ability to understand, our conceptual range, so to speak. So from that perspective, dimensions are, of course, higher levels of structure, much higher levels of structure than those associated with the level of structure that allows us to create the physical universe, because the physical universe is the only universe that's constructed with the use of 12 frequencies, and therefore those 12 frequencies are the physical universe, and those 12 frequencies are the only 12 frequencies that are created within the first full dimension. And so the first full dimension is the physical universe, and the physical universe is the first full dimension. So we start to see there's a bit more understanding there. So in terms of a light body, we don't really have light bodies. We have these templates. If you want to call them light bodies, you can do, but we don't have one. We have 7, and those 7 are associated with the different frequential states. Think of them as different layers of complexity, layers of detail, that are overlaid on each other but in the same space. And again, this idea that we can specifically identify ourselves as being a particular geometric shape is, again, a potential reference to frequency. Now, if you consider that, getting back to the example I gave about the sand pan, we have a pan full of sand and we expose it to a frequential state, i.e. a musical note, for example, or other frequency that's above the hearing range of the human ear. The sand will adopt a pattern associated with that frequency. But the frequencies associated with the gross physical are known. We understand that, and there's an idea that they could be something else, the higher the frequencies. But if we go to the fifth frequential state, which in this instance, Wendy Kennedy refers to as 5D, which is an incorrect thought process, that we continue to perpetuate. When we don't perpetuate it, we'll start to understand more. Then we would not get a geometric shape relative to the sand pan full of sand, because the sound associated with the fifth frequency isn't sound as we know it. It's a frequential state that's well above what we could consider to be sound. In fact, it's well above things like the radio waves, well above the radio waves, well above things like those things we call X-rays, for example. It's well above light, and therefore we start to go back down the rabbit hole of light language. There's no such thing as light language per se, because anything that is above a frequential level of the third frequential state and goes into the fourth frequential state starts to become telepathic. And so the idea that we're using geometry and the spoken word and various different ways in which we would say things with the vocal cords isn't anything other than a complete misunderstanding. So light bodies and light language it's a low-level explanation for something which is much, much higher and isn't specifically well understood, and therefore can create misinformation. So from my perspective, when we say, are we moving from the so-called light bodies associated with the gross physical and moving into the next level of frequency, which is above the gross physical, into the first, or to the lower astral levels. I don't like to use the words lower astral or upper astral or lower upper astral, etc., because that's, again, that pulls us back into the misdirected nomenclature that we use as New Age individuals. We start to like to use these words to explain things when really we shouldn't be. We should just be experiencing it rather than trying to explain it. And so, in effect, the energy templates have two functions, and would have two basic appearances if we could see them. The first one is that they basically adopt, in general, the outside of the human form. They have to, because this is what the body is. If we were incarnating into a dog, for example, we don't incarnate into animals, by the way. With our sentience is far too advanced to incarnate into a lower body type. But if we were to incarnate into a dog's body, for example, the energy template would be, or the energy templates would be pretty similar to the dog's body. If we went up the frequencies, they tend to become more and more amorphous. And so when we go through to the fourth, fifth, and sixth frequential levels and seventh frequential levels, the energy templates associated with them start to become more amorphous rather than specifically related to the outside shape or form of the human body or the dog's body in this instance. So to say that we're moving from one frequential level to another, and that our energy templates are represented by a geometric shape, and that geometric shape is going to jump a level, is slightly misdirected, and it's using nomenclature that is incorrect. So again, we're not going from the third dimension to the fifth dimension, because we're bypassing the fourth dimension, which doesn't exist. And we say this on a regular basis. But actually, the fourth dimension does exist, but it's a higher level of structure and is nowhere near the level of structure that's associated with the first of the universes associated with the multiverse. So the meridian systems associated with let's call it the fifth frequential level, rather than harp on about the geometric shapes. Things and are they the macabres associated with that frequential level? Let's look at it from a completely different perspective. As we move up the frequencies, the energy systems associated with them start to change based upon moving from one to another. Now, there's an energy system associated with the collective frequencies that create the gross physical. That's associated with the first three frequencies and the first three energy templates. And those meridian lines are the junctures of the energies that flow around the form that is the human body. In this particular instance, it could be other bodies as well. If we move to the fourth frequential level, we have a series of energy lines and energy distribution points that are specific to the fourth frequency. Nothing to do with the third, nothing to do with the fifth. And so, although they're in the same space and the same locations, generally, they do different things because they're associated with different frequencies. So in essence, the potential locations for these macabres is associated with a frequential state, not a location per se. Anything that is associated with some form of representation associated with frequency would be within the same space, in the same location within that space, and not in a different location. So, for instance, if we use Wendy Kennedy's idea that we're going from the two-star tetrahedrons to an octahedron, which is two base pyramids stuck together on their bases, then if that was a representation of the frequential state of going from the third frequential level, bypassing the fourth to the fifth frequential level, then that representation would be in the same space, in the same location, not specifically moving anywhere. Now, this may be a misunderstanding based upon the location of the chakras, because the chakras do move location depending upon where they are on the body. Now, it's not specifically a function of their location that is based upon their frequential state. So just because the heart chakra is sitting behind the breastplate, for example, doesn't mean that the fourth frequency level is based there. It just happens to be that that's the location of this energy receiver. We call it the heart chakra, and it fits into and connects into an energy conduit that it connects all of the different chakras together in a multi-frequential way. So if we look at the potential diagram in the end of it, looking at the truth about positive and negative charges in the male versus female bodies, is that real? Not necessarily. Again, it's a representation towards duality. Female is supposed to be negative, male is supposed to be male. And it's based upon the genitals, basically, and that's what but it's been twisted into a different direction, saying that there's a negative charge and a positive charge. The human body is the same. It's just the reproduction system is slightly different, and the functions associated with the ability to reproduce creates the need for different hormonal structures to support it. So, in essence, if I come back to the question, is this how I see our light bodies or meridians shifting as we ascend the frequencies? The answer is no, but some people would want to refer to it as being something they can understand. My understanding is as we move up the frequencies, we start to become more composite, so to speak. And what do I mean by composite? Well, if we ascended from the need to position ourselves within the first three frequencies that creates the gross physical through ascension, through working on ourselves, through evolving in a single lifetime, we would move to the fourth frequential level. Then in doing that, what would happen is that we would no longer need to be anchored within the first three, the gross physical. So our predominant focus would be on the fourth frequential level, the lower astral, if you want to call it that. That would mean that the representation of the body, the human body, would not need to be maintained in the gross physical. So we'd lose the first three energy templates and focus on the fourth, fifth, sixth and seventh energy templates. The fourth energy template being the lowest of them. So we wouldn't even have a base chakra, sacral or solar chakra. We would have a composite chakra that's based upon the heart chakra location, that's coping with the ability to have some anchor point within the physical universe, but is primarily focused on the lowest of the frequencies, which is the fourth frequential level. Therefore, the heart chakra becomes a composite of the gross physical and the first of the spiritual physical levels. Now, from that perspective, if we were focused upon, but still having the connections to the fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth, ninth, and 10th frequencies, the eighth, ninth, and 10th frequencies are this step-down function that allows the soul to enter into the body and allows some level of connectivity between the form factor that we adopt to be able to experience, learn, and evolve in the way we're supposed to in the gross physical or the spiritual physical levels, and therefore we're still connected to the via the Tantien, the core star and the soul seat through the Hara line to the true energetic self. We've still got that connectivity. So in effect, what we've got is this ability to stay in the physical universe, but at a higher level. That means we wouldn't be able to really experience what's on the gross physical levels. We might be able to touch into it momentarily, but because we don't have the energy templates associated with the gross physical, we wouldn't be able to manifest, or our body just isn't manifested on the first three frequential levels. So in essence, we would maintain a similar body form factor, but that form factor would be focused upon the higher frequency that it is, and not focused upon the first three frequencies, which are the gross physical. So from that perspective, if we ascend, we move out of. If we want to descend, we move back into. But in essence, if we have the capability of working on ourselves and moving up and down the frequencies, then we would manifest a gross physical body, or dissolve a gross physical body, as the case may be, to go back into the higher frequencies. But it's a very difficult thing to do, to move up and down the frequencies, specifically move down the frequencies, because you start to lose your communicative bandwidth and your function as you move down the frequencies, because you lose the connectivity that you would have, and therefore the function associated with higher frequencies. So any entity, any incarnate entity that ascends a frequential state would want to stay there, because there's a lot of energy required to manifest a gross physical form, even temporarily. And that's why individuals who ascend the frequencies, they just disappear. You don't see them, because it's very difficult to being almost impossible. Although it does happen, we know poltergeist activity, where chairs and tables and clocks fall off walls, for example, get moved around. And so that creates a lot of energy. That needs a lot of energy, and it's a difficult thing to do. But in essence, as we move up the frequencies, we would not be visible here. We'd move beyond the gross physical, and so we are not going to observe those individuals who have ascended, because they've moved beyond our our perceptual range. Because the perceptual range the physical eyes see is a very, very narrow frequential range, between 400 and 700 nanometers, which is very small, extremely small. And the physical eyes see the perceptual range associated with the capability of the soul in the body to be able to work with different frequencies. And so the spiritual third eye is focused upon the first three frequencies. So if we are focusing on the fourth frequency, we would see what's in the fourth frequency with the physical eyes. But that would mean the physical eyes have to be transposed up to the next frequential level. So in essence, answering the question in summary, it's a possibility that there is some form associated with the frequential state of a particular energy template if we were to isolate it. Whether that is a tetrahedron or a octahedron depends upon how the person wants to see it. Personally, I wouldn't consider those geometric shapes as being correct, because they're gross physical shapes. And when you move up the frequencies, what you experience is not based upon the gross physical. It's based upon spiritual physical and the higher spiritual physical levels. So I would guess that what Wendy Kennedy is being shown is that as an example, there could be different shapes that would represent as Merkabas the frequential state of a particular energy template, and not the form factor that these energy templates are allowing or adopting to allow the soul to enter into it. So what I'm seeing here is she's being given an example that she can understand, and not the actuality, because it would be difficult to understand it. And in terms of meridian shifting, I don't see them shifting. I see them disappearing, because if we're moving from the gross physical to the spiritual physical levels, the meridians or the energy lines that we don't need don't exist. So I hope that answers the question, Nula. It's a bit of a funny one, and we have to understand that sometimes we pick up information that's based upon what we can work with, what we understand, how expansive we are, how we can understand it. And sometimes it's examples we're given and not the actual. Think of Jesus telling parables, telling stories to the general public to help explain to them higher metaphysical concepts. Those stories were taken as being, the truth, so to speak. But the problem is with New Age individuals, and that includes me as well, we're only able to understand what we're able to understand. And that which is beyond us, we tend to get examples of that we can work with. With me, it's engineering of all different sorts. And that makes it understandable from my perspective. And so when we understand different concepts, we have to realise that some of these concepts are given to us in ways that we can understand, to be able to broadcast to people who will understand in the same way or a similar way. So looking beyond that, if we are capable of looking beyond, then we start to get more detail behind the truth. So in this instance, the detail behind the truth is that we would move away from the gross physical, and therefore we don't need the first three bodies associated with the first three energy templates, light bodies, if you want to call them that, collectively together, that create the gross physical. And therefore we would use the other energy templates associated with the 4th, 5th, 6th and 7th frequencies. And if there's a symbol of some sort, or something that represents each frequency, then it would represent that frequency. It wouldn't particularly represent the human body at that frequency. So that's something else to consider. It's a generic frequential state, not something which is associated with the human form. And in terms of any positive or negative changes associated with the human form, it's simply a way of understanding I feel, the differences between the human male and female body. Not that we are represented by positive and negative charges per se. The human body is the same. It's just that they have a different function from a reproductive system perspective. Well, I hope that explains it, and well, thank you for the questions, and now let's move on to the meditation. Welcome to this meditation in November 2024, and what we're going to meditate on now is entering into the function of collectivism. If you remember, the meditation in October dealt with removal of jealousy. And this is part of the road towards collectivism. It's part of being able to detach from the need to have something that somebody else has got, or the need to be better than them. So let's close our eyes and sit with our back straight, with our feet flat on the ground, or if you're sitting cross-legged, again, sit with your back straight and your neck in alignment with your back. Put your hands palm uppermost on your upper thighs. And with your closed eyes, gently focus on the origin of the spiritual or third eye. Third eye is located in between the two eyebrows and above the bridge of the nose. And I want you to consider all of the things associated with collectivism. Being of service to others, giving a considered response, not entering into argument or one-upmanship. Using your free will to choose the right way. Using your free will to see how your thoughts, behaviours and subsequent actions can have a negative effect. Look at the things that do create the negative effect, and then you'll be able to observe how you can navigate around those and create the positive effect instead. Resist the desire to drop litter. Resist the desire to think only of yourself when you're doing something. Resist the desire to be better than somebody else. Resist the desire to just be you and think only of you and nobody else matters. Enter into the thought, the feeling of how your thoughts, behaviours and subsequent actions can affect others positively without forcing yourself on them. Consider how your actions can be a better action, how your thoughts can be better thoughts, how your behaviours can be a good example. Think of the things that you can do that affect your environment, those other souls incarnate into your environment, and the environment itself in a positive way. These are the things that create collectivism. Self-governance in a law-abiding, caring, concerning, collective way, rather than a law-breaking, individualized, self-serving, self-satisfying, ignorant way. Think about your everyday functions. How can you turn that into being a good example of how to work collectively? What can you do in your everyday to show the proper way, the good example way? You don't need to be a teacher. You don't need to be a great sage. You just need to choose the correct way where those around you are going to benefit. Think of it in this term. If you don't drop that sweet wrapper out of the car window, somebody doesn't have to clean it up. Also, if you don't drop that sweet wrapper out of the car window, the environment stays clean. It's thinking, behaving, and acting in a responsible way. This is what creates maturity. This is what creates collectivism. Just contemplate on those words a moment. Meditate on the things that you do and then choose the best route forwards. Choose the best response to the circumstance, best response for the environment, the best response for the interaction of yourself with others and those others with others. So that everybody starts to consider their actions, their thoughts, behaviours and actions, and how those interactions, those thoughts, and those behaviour patterns can create a desire within others to follow suit, to give the considered response, the positive response, not the negative response. The caring and concerning response, the aware response. So again, you can consider this for as long as you want to. You can extend this meditation into however long you want to. Choosing to make decisions based upon how you affect the collective of us all is a very mature and responsible way of thinking, behaving and acting. So whilst considering this and absorbing this within you, slowly come back into the room or the environment that you're in. Slowly open your eyes and take a drink of water to help ground you. And just meditate a moment or consider a moment how much better the world would be if everybody thought about how their thoughts, behaviours and actions affected everybody else. It doesn't create stasis, it creates maturity and high civilization. So, I'll give you Namaste and God's love and Source's love to you all. I look forward to working with you in December's World Satsanga. Did you see the aliens in Crete?